From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics, here with the Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'll be sharing an interview with Joel Brennan. He's a former Secretary of the Department of Administration under Governor Tony Evers, and he is running as a Democrat for governor. So, here's what he had to say. All right. Thank you so much, Joel, for joining me on the podcast today. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And just with a question, why did you decide to run for governor?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. Thanks for having me on today. So really, this comes down to the fact that over the course of 30 years, I have experience in solving problems in the private sector, in government, in the nonprofit world. And we live in really abnormal times. And we need people, I think, who are willing to, one, stand up and fight where it's necessary, but two, make sure we're rolling up our sleeves to get things done. And that's what I've demonstrated in my career, whether it's been at Discovery World when I was the CEO of Wisconsin's largest science and technology center, the 3 years that I spent as the Secretary of the Department of Administration with Governor Evers as his top cabinet official, and working our way through COVID. So it's all of those things and others in my career have demonstrated that I'm somebody who's really interested, willing to make sure that we're going to roll up our sleeves to get things done.
Yeah, so what would be some of the biggest priorities for you if you're elected to the governor's office, the biggest things that you want to tackle?
Well, really, I think no matter where I go around the state these days, everybody is talking about the costs, the basic costs of whether it's their health care, whether it's the housing that they're seeking, whether it's childcare, the situation in the public schools around our state. So all of these things are kind of the bread and butter issues that people care about. And those are the issues that I think we better be trying to get to work on with the next legislative session and the new governor, because one of the great legacies that Governor Evers will leave is that rather than the gerrymandered maps that we had starting in 2011 with Scott Walker and really an institutional majority with the Republicans in the legislature over the last 15 years, there's opportunities for us to have with the right decisions made with the legislature and the governor, a Democratic governor with allies in the legislature, we can make big strides on areas around healthcare, on investment in housing, in making sure that we're doing right by our kids in public schools. And those are the areas where I want to invest in immediately. And I want to make sure that we can hit the ground running. Part of the thing that I think I bring to the table is that having served as the Secretary of Administration and seeing the breadth of what happens inside state government, and frankly, having to do that during the worst public health and economic crisis over the last 100 years, I think I'm ready to do that and ready to use all of the tools and the levers at our disposal. And with additional allies and potentially a Democratic majority in the Assembly and the Senate, we can do things that are truly promoting and protecting Wisconsin values and ensuring that we're getting things done.
Yeah, you mentioned the cost of living, which has obviously been a big topic at the moment, but I'm wondering, are there any specific policies? What do you think is the best way to reduce costs for Wisconsinites?
Well, one, let's take a specific issue around the issue of housing. No matter where you go around the state of Wisconsin, there are communities that are unable to grow, where there are young families that simply can't find housing. And there's a couple of reasons for it. One is a dramatic undersupply of housing in the state. We are short about 70,000 really entry-level homes around the state of Wisconsin. And so we need to make it easier for Wisconsin builders to build here. We need to make it easier for Wisconsin homeowners and young families to be able to afford that. Some of that comes down to programs related to down payment assistance that already exist that we can invest more deeply in. We can make sure that we're partnering in the right level with local government, because a lot of these decisions about where and whether housing is built, those are local decisions, and we need to make sure that we're empowering local units of government and have the right kind of partnership to do that. But when you're in a situation over the last several years where 5 years ago the average age of a first-time home buyer was 33 years old. Last year, it was 40 years old. We're taking that American dream and putting it out of reach for a whole generation of Wisconsin residents, and that has impacts on education. It has impacts on community stability and safety, and on economic development in lots of parts of our state. So those are areas where the governor can lay down a marker and say, this is something that we're going to do. Make sure that we are organizing and galvanizing our resources, every agency that has responsibility towards it. So like those are the specific ways that we can get this done. And to be honest, Wisconsin communities can't wait any longer for that. They're eager for this, and they need this for Wisconsin to grow and be who we want to be.
Now, you're part of a pretty broad field of Democrats running for governor to succeed Governor Evers. Makes you different or sets you apart from the rest of the pack, and why should Wisconsinites choose you to run the state?
It's a great question. And all the candidates that are running on the Democratic side, I consider friends, and they're people who I've worked with. A lot of them I worked with in my time in the Evers administration. I think the distinguishing factor, I think, and I hope that I bring to the race, is that over the last 20 years, I've had really nothing but executive experiences where I was responsible for primary decision making, and things like when I was the secretary of the Department of Administration under Governor Evers, we were responsible not only for all of the core things that the Department of Administration does, including procurement, human resources, information technology, real estate, managing the relations with the Native American tribes over Indian gaming, relations with local government. So we had all of those things that I was doing as the secretary, the state budget. But in addition to that, about a year in, you layered on the crisis of COVID and what that meant, and the fact that Wisconsin also got in total about $4.5 billion of federal assistance that needed to go to local governments, it needed to go to family farms, to renters who couldn't keep a roof over their head, potentially to small businesses. And we were able to lead the country in some of the work that we did on there. And I've never been prouder of the work that I saw public servants and people in the state government do. They were doing their day job, and they were doing it under duress, but they were also creating programs that were allowing and affording people to stay in their homes and really helping businesses see a light at the end of the tunnel. And we made government work. Now, so if there's something that distinguishes me, it's that I like to think that the course of that 20 years of executive experience in making those decisions, negotiating tough deals, managing budgets, standing up to extremists, that is a good proving ground for being governor. And that's who I am. And that's why I'm ready to do the job on day one.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you also, immigration has been a huge issue of the past several months, with the Trump administration really trying to crack down on illegal immigration, including in Minneapolis, where we saw 2 U.S. citizens who were killed. How would you handle the situation if the administration were to ramp up enforcement in Wisconsin? How do you see that relationship with the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, the occupation of Minneapolis is something that's beneath us as Americans. And I think that every one of us was outraged. A Wisconsin native was killed, on his knees in the course of the occupation in Minneapolis. And we watched in horror what happened all throughout that occupation. And so, there's no way that any of us wants that to happen in Wisconsin. So what we need to do is make sure that we have prepared for that we are doing things that ensure that there's no ability to use only administrative warrants on people, to ensure that we're protecting people around schools, around hospitals, around courthouses and places of worship. So, but the additional step that I have taken is to suggest and do what a number of other states have already done, is to establish an accountability commission in Wisconsin, where we could ensure that if and when there are situations that happen, and I saw something in Hudson within the last week or so, where when someone sees something that's happening out on the street, they have a place that they can go to that is state sanctioned, that they can upload their video, they can upload their photographs. They know that there is a place where those will be secure, and that at the appropriate time, when we have the ability to hold people accountable for what they're doing, if they're a federal officer or an ICE agent, we have that established. And we have a panel of people who are above reproach: retired judges, retired law enforcement, people who have worked in the nonprofit sector and immigration. And those people would be on a body that would ensure that when there is a time that we can hold those to account, and when there's a public reckoning that we can do to make sure that there's accountability, that we have that in place. And so that's an area, and I've been heartened to see that other states have done this. I believe the newly elected governor of New Jersey has just done something like this. So it's something that other states have done. And while nobody wants the situation that happened to Minneapolis to be replicated anywhere around the country, I think we need to make sure that we're making preparations for that in Wisconsin and ensuring that we have things in place if and when that happens. And so, it's not only standing up to the federal government where it's necessary, but having the tools in place and being able to be responsive in the event that this happens. And I think that's what Wisconsin ought to be doing. And I think that's what leadership means in this case.
Now, another big issue of conversation in the state right now is data centers. How would you balance Wisconsinites' concern about the environmental and cost impacts of data centers with also this potential for economic growth?
Yeah, and data centers are a fast-moving issue, and AI is something that I think is of concern to many people because of its deep impacts. But there's also opportunity, as you say, on the economic side for us to gain there. And I think what we need to do is, one, draw a line in the sand and ensure that when there are data centers being built anywhere, there is no taxpayer is going to pay for the construction, for the operation, for the long-term maintenance of that, because there are potentials for these for things to be there for many, many years, and there may be ways in which they either operate more efficiently or they move out, and we are left holding the bag, and that can't be the case for Wisconsin taxpayers. So that's a red line. The other things we need to do is ensure that there are the appropriate guardrails and the appropriate amount of public involvement in these things, so that there are no more NDAs that are happening where communities only find out about this at the 11th hour, where there is the appropriate amount of involvement up front at the community level, because a lot of these are decisions that are made at the local level. I think it's clear that nothing is going to happen with data centers in the next 9 months. The legislature has virtually gone home, and they've decided that they're going to just punt on this issue. And so I think it's one of the things that the next governor immediately has to do. What I will do is make sure that we are taking the right kind of a pause to look at this and make sure that we are doing things in the first few months of the next administration to ensure that that everybody who is involved in the data center process knows what the bar is, whether it's on the environmental side, whether it's on sustainability, and whether it's on protecting the taxpayer, where they know what that is, and that there is the ability at the local level to demonstrate the level of impact and investment at the local level and the involvement of local communities, so that is clear. I think one of the challenges with this is that we passed in the state a tax credit a couple of years ago that kind of put us on the map for data centers, but didn't do some of the other legwork that was necessary. And so I think there are good proposals in the legislature that are a terrific start right now. And I think that there's ways that we can deal with this in the very early months of 2027, so that there is that everybody who's involved in this process knows kind of where the guardrails are and how you do this. That's responsible government.
Yeah, just to clarify, you mentioned taking a pause. Do you mean pausing data center projects or just taking a look at regulations in general?
I think we need to pause on those projects in the first months of 2027 until the legislature and the governor agree on what those are. And I don't think that this is something that will last forever. I think it's something that responsible parties and after the fall elections here, that there will be a consensus that we can get very early on and we'll move forward with.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up our interview?
Well, just the other issue that I think, we're just yesterday, there were the start of the midterm elections in other states, and we have those here in Wisconsin coming up. And I think one of the other things that is absolutely on the ballot right now is democracy. And when you have, Donald Trump saying that he wants to nationalize elections in places like Wisconsin, and Steve Bannon saying that ICE agents are going to be surrounding the polling places, I think all of those are things we have to take very seriously. And so part of what I've also talked about here is how do we make sure that we are protecting the people who are conducting our elections in Wisconsin, that we're protecting people's opportunity to vote by mail, to do all of the early things that make it easier on election clerks in Wisconsin, that we have the reforms like being able to get ready before election day to do the early voting, to make sure that we're processing those. So like those are things that we have done, and so I just think it's important. And I laid out a very specific plan, if necessary, to bring up members of the National Guard, as we did in 2020, to work alongside their community members at the polling places. I think those are the types of things that we better be prepared to do this fall, because when Donald Trump talks, oftentimes you don't have to believe him. When he talks about elections and democracy and limiting people's opportunities to vote, I think we ought to take him very seriously, and that's something that I want to make sure that we're talking about everywhere on the campaign trail as well.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks a lot, Kate. Good to talk to you.
All right, everyone, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. If you want to learn more about the governor's race in Wisconsin, you can head to wispolitics.com. In the meantime, I'm Kate Morton. Thanks for listening to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.